We have a single-story residential structure. You look at it as side alpha is up front, and if we work our way around clockwise, essentially, or from left going around to right, we have Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. So that way he could describe, for instance, we have a fire in the Bravo side of the structure, or the Charlie side, meaning the back side of the structure, the Delta side, meaning the right side of the structure. But when you're inside and you can't see anything as you experience, you have no idea which side the left side is, or the north side. But what you do know is I came through the front door. That's behind me now, so I know Bravo's over here and Charlie's over there, and it gives a lot better spatial orientation. And that's one of the ways how we know where we are in that structure without being able to see or hear, those kind of things. It's just spatial awareness where you are. Right? So our medic crews get teamed up with the engine company, with the first two engine company, and they help with what we call doors and corners. So they help to make sure the doors are open, make sure they stay open, and work all the corners for the hose line so we don't get kinks in the hose, watch your step. Yep. And that way we can effectively get the hose line and the nozzle in place fast. Right? The faster we get water on the fire, the faster things get better. So if we move in, we'll be able to get you a view if he comes in. And each person kind of leapfrogs up into the position. They get as much hose in there as necessary so we can get water in there. Our truck companies usually split. We have 4 personnel on the truck. They typically go what we call 2 and 2. 2 inside, 2 outside. And the 2 inside basically go inside and they search. They search for life safety first and for fire. So they go in through the darkness ahead of the hose line, searching for where that fire actually is and if there's any victims closest to the fire first, and then they work their way around the rest of the structure. For the most endangered people first, try and find them. That's our priority. Not that it's not to protect property, but we look at life safety first. Sure. Right? So we look at it as what we call the acronym of LIPS, right? Life safety, incident stabilization, property, and so on and so forth, right? So life, L, is always first. So we go in, search for people, then we search for the fire, we try and get the people out, put the fire out, and then we do the conservation of property as well. So our truck crews on the outside, what we call the X-ray team, or the 2 members from the truck that stay outside, will circle around the building, throw ladders if necessary, and what we call soften up the building. Softening up the building might mean creating a secondary exit or a secondary means of egress for the crews that are inside on the other, say, Charlie side, Bravo side, Delta side. So if they had to bail out, those doors would already be cracked open and ready. So we can have as much safety as possible. When we get in there, if something goes wrong, we can bail out if we need to out of those exits. So they'll soften the buildings. They'll throw ladders, specifically the Alpha and the Charlie side. So one up front, one in the back. And they'll go to the roof, and if necessary, they'll actually cut the roof open to allow all the heat, the toxic gases, all the smoke and all that to get out of the structure, which clears up the visibility so then we can see. But also for the victims, if there's still any victims inside, of course, they're not wearing a respirator of any sort, right? So if it would be damaging to us, it's certainly damaging to them. So our primary focus, again, life safety, clearing all of that out, get those toxic gases, get all that stuff out of there so those victims will have the best chance of survival. So our truck companies get up there and do what we call ventilation, whether it be horizontal with windows or vertical by going to the roof. And it depends a little bit on what's going on with the fire with that. So our engine officer right now is saying got water on the fire. So letting everybody know, hey, I'm here. I got the hose line in place. We're putting water on the fire. That's a notification that we want to see as incident command, which typically be my role, but we have somebody else doing it right now. So I could be with you, right? But I want to know we're getting water on the fire. That's our purpose, right? Put the wet stuff on the red stuff, put the fire out. Put the fire out, everything gets better. But when we get that water on the fire, we know that things, one, are progressing in the right direction. We're making our way through. But also for those truck companies, they should not vent until we have water on the fire. And the reason being is if we vent, we actually create what we call a flow path. We create fresh air and we introduce that fresh air into the environment. If you ever see a Chimea or a jet engine, that's what you're doing, is introducing fresh air, right? So that fresh air is drawn to the heat. That heat sucks in that fresh air and gets worse. The fire gets worse. So if we don't have water on the fire yet, it's a coordinated effort. They shouldn't be cutting the roof. So we have to have water on the fire, then we can start to ventilate so we don't make it worse. Yeah. Right. So all those things have to coordinate. So they're coordinating over the radio. We do our best with communications. It can be difficult to hear, especially with the saws going and all those other things, but do our best to communicate those things very clearly and succinctly. This is what I have. This is what I'm doing. Here's what I need. Here's the progress, and so on and so forth. Right? So that's what we're doing. So if you want to take a peek inside, so we can look. You may or may not be able to see it with this, but there's a camera through here, and you can kind of get an orientation. You can see that white is the hose line. So that white is the hose line because it's cool. Those darker colors, okay, and the whiter colors are basically temperature changes because it's a thermal imaging camera. So it's all based on temperature. So as we were to work our way around and through, you can see areas like this, okay? You can see my hand. In some cases, you'll actually be able to see, you can see the firefighters back through there. So with use of the thermal imager, we can actually see through the smoke essentially. It's, if you think of it as sort of like night vision, but it's not, it's showing us the thermal grades, right, and temperature differences. And that's how we'll tell. So in a real structure fire, if we scan typically upward because of the heat, you'd see it blasting hot, right? You'd see a massive amount of white up there with the heat. And you could search through and see the dark spots and the light spots and actually find not only your orientation, but where the fire is as well. So as you work your way through, you can tell if it's in the attic, if it's above you, which obviously is not a great thing for us, and where any victims might be. So for instance, on the ground, if we look at the ground here, you can see the different spots and the different gradients in temperature. So if I stood there for a long while, or I laid there, for instance, you'd see a body mark on the ground because that temperature that's still holding. So if I recently saw a body mark and almost a skid mark after that, for instance, I would know there was a victim there that recently crawled off. I could almost track their footprints if you were to, where did they crawl off to? Did they go to hide under a bed or in a closet or whatever it may be? So we use this not only for spatial orientation, but tracking the fire, finding victims, and that type of thing as well.
Amazing.
Yeah. And if you want to take a look, obviously you're welcome to go as far as you would like. Here, this is all theatrical. To keep it in mind too, they typically have the SCBA mask on. Right? With the SCBA mask on, it's even harder to see because that's just another layer. They're typically stuffed up a little bit and things like that, so it can get pretty difficult to see. And then deeper and deeper we get into the structure, the light from the front door goes away, it gets darker, it gets harder and harder to see. So that's again where we come in through here. We can see the crews kind of working back through there. Occasionally you'll see someone kind of walk through or walk past. If you want, we'll come through this way. Watch your step. So you can clearly see the crew member there, whereas with the naked eye, you might not be able to see it. This would be a good example. You can see that crew member working his way through right there. Whereas the naked eye, you never see him, you know? If we look back towards the front door, the naked eye can get very, especially if it were nighttime, right? But with this, now we can see where that front door is. So that's our exit. And the other thing we can do is we can track and follow the hose line. So a lot of the things that we try and do is ensure our own safety, of course, right? That's the first thing you learn. Don't make yourself a victim, right? So we have to ensure that we're safe as well. The big thing with that is tracking personnel, knowing where we are. And for the guys on the outside, we need to know where the guys on the inside are. So I can show you a little bit of that as well and show you kind of how we track people and all these things.
Definitely watch the step here to the dark. 320 all through. Drill is ended. You guys want to make your way out to the outside side.
So they've done the drill, they went in, they found the fire, put water on the fire, found any victims, removed them from the structure. And then what we do is we basically check for extension. So we do an overhaul process. So we may put the fire out in this area, but we need to make sure it didn't extend through, say, the wall or the ceiling or whatever it may be. So now what we're doing is we go through and we'll overhaul. So start tearing things apart until we no longer find any fire and ensure that there's no embers sitting where it would cause what we call a rekindle. We come back a couple hours later because it caught fire again. right? So we want to avoid all those kind of things. So once we go through, we fully overhaul everything. We ensure that there's no more fire, there's no chance of a rekindle. We soak everything down. Then we'll go ahead and open everything up and we'll ventilate the building, get all the smoke and again, toxins and all of that stuff out of there. And then go from there with investigations and the gentleman that met earlier with Nick and those guys, right? They'll come in, try and determine the cause and its origin and why it took place, how could it prevent in the future, do they have smoke detectors, all those kinds of things. That's all their side of things. So that's basically what happens here. So I'll walk you out this way. Did you want to use the ticket altar to kind of see a little bit more or anything? Or?
Oh, no, I think I'm fine.
Okay. Walk through that. So, a lot of times we get asked, why do we have to walk with them this way? I'll walk you back to the beginning part. Why do we have so many people on scene? So why do we need all those people? Why do we need? Well, again, this is a fake fire, but in a fake fire, we still need the amount of people that we need to accomplish the most basic task. So, in any given fire, even the lowest level, smallest fires that aren't that involved, you have to have somebody that goes and brings the water to the fire, essentially, right? That's our engine companies. So they have the pumps and 500-gallon tank, so they can go ahead and fill 500 gallons. Most of our hand lines, like the one that you see that they're using, these yellow lines, they flow 175 gallons. If you do the math, you have 500 gallons, 175 gallons only lasts you 2-3 minutes, right? It's quick. Well, typically it's what we call GPMs versus BTUs, gallons per minute versus BTUs, gross thermal units, right? So how much water do we have versus how much fire do we have? Quite often 500 gallons just is not enough. So what we have to do is we have to hook into a fire hydrant. That's where they'll lay the larger lines into a fire hydrant, and the hydrant supplies from anywhere from 500 to 1,500 gallons per minute. And then we can put as much fire out as we want to, right? So when that takes place, not only do you need the first engine in to make that initial assessment and start the attack, you need another engine to hook up to the hydrant to help you. That next engine then, once they've done that, we'll move forward and pull a second line or backup line into there. So now we have 2 lines going. The truck company, as I explained, they kind of split, right? So we quite often will go 2 and 2 between the 4 personnel, 2 inside, 2 outside. Those inside duties, they go ahead and do search and rescue, essentially. And the outside guys soften up the building, ventilation, things like that. So there's that. Then we again roll back to keeping us safe. So we have a third engine that comes on scene, and that's what we call the RIT team. That RIT team, a rapid intervention team. So when things go wrong and the rescuers need rescuing, that's the RIT team. So we have a third engine that comes on scene. They'll kind of post up toward the front of the building wherever the crews are working with different equipment. So we have a rapid intervention bag, and that has some different equipment into it with an extra air bottle, different hoses that we can make quick connections, things like that. So if we had a firefighter go down, they can hook them up on air. As long as we can keep them with fresh air, we can slow things down quite a bit. They can rip them out of the building and do what we need to do and save that life of that fire. We have that RIT team. We have the medic unit that'll show up on scene, team up with their first engine, and again do what we call doors and corners. They help work that hose around everything. Because even though you have a 3-man engine company, you have the driver, Mike, right, that you met, right? He's got to drive, he's got to pump. So he stays outside. That leaves the lieutenant and the tailboard to go inside. Well, the lieutenant is doing this with this tick as we kind of work ourselves through, right? Running strategy, doing those kind of things, and guiding that tailboarder who's pulling the nozzle. And you've done some of the work feeling what a nozzle and a hose line feels like. Well, doing it by yourself, very different. It's doable, but it's challenging. And depending on the structure, how many twists and turns, upstairs, downstairs, all that stuff. So you have only the 2 people, that's where that medic unit comes into play. And that medic unit will assist with maneuvering that hose line, making sure the nozzle gets where it needs to move the water off the fire. That's where they come into play. And then if it's an extensive fire, well, those guys are going to get tired, right? At some point, they'll burn through their air bottle. And our typical air bottle, although they say it's a 45-minute bottle, really only get work time about 10-15 minutes. It's a lot of heavy work, right? All the bunker gear, the 40-pound air pack, and all that 10-pound helmet, and all this kind of thing on your head, a 5-pound in the pain. Some of us stick extra things in the helmet like it's a toolbox. So when you have all that gear on and you're wearing the snowsuit to keep all the heat in, they say it's to keep the heat out, but it keeps the heat in, right? You get overheated and you burn through air very quickly. So again, for us, we work them for about 10, 15 minutes, and we got a full amount of changing with the different crew. Well, we need a different crew to set up a rehab. So when those guys come out, they can rehab. They can have water. They can shed some of the heat. They can do different. They can have their vitals checked, make sure they're medically okay. So everybody has a role. And the more extensive the fire gets, the more extensive the units get. You need more units, So it may just be a single family structure, but you might have 15 units on scene. And you're only using 2 hose lines. Why do we need all these people? Everybody has a role. Everybody has a piece. Any on rotational units and things like that. If it's extensive and it's not going out in the first 10 to 20 minutes, we're going to call what we call a working fire. Meaning we need additional apparatus to start making our way to scene. That additional apparatus might be from Argo, might be from Dunedin, might be from Safety Market. Typically, mostly would be from Clearwater, but we may already be on the medical road. We're not available. Because our units essentially work in 2 ways. Run medical, then we run fire, infiltration, and accidents, and fire alarms, and all those other things. We're not just fire units. When a fire comes in, even though the closest unit might be engine 45 for rear post 2, the physically available closest unit might be a different, city. That next closest unit, when that unit needs help, might be another city coming out. So that's why we have to call, say, a working fire. Well, for instance, if it's going further and further and getting more extensive, we would go into a second alarm, a third alarm, and so on and so forth. And each alarm basically gives us that initial accompaniment of response. So we double up on the response if we need to. If we don't need to, we don't call them. So I can show you over here, typically, and this is somewhat representative. You would usually on scene, if it were in a training, you'd have at least your 3 engines, the medic unit, and a truck company. You'd have the 320 unit, which is the pickup truck that you see over there in the driveway, and he's our safety officer. So he is overall safety, making sure people are wearing their gear properly, making sure, working as part of the command structure, that the tactics are appropriate. There's no rapid change in conditions. The roof didn't suddenly collapse and I couldn't see it, right? So my viewpoint is typically something like this, where I'm parked here as command and I'm looking at the structure like that. And if I'm lucky, there's no apparatus in the way. Most of the time there's another apparatus in the way. So I rely heavily on that 320 or that safety officer to be my eyes and ears up front, kind of a forward working boss, a forward working supervisor to oversee everything that's going on. And they are our eyes and ears in the thick of it. Chief, this is what's going on. We had a roof collapse. We had this, all of a sudden the smoke conditions completely changed. Well, that's stuff I need to know that I might not be able to see from this vantage point. So they're vital. Incredible. I actually promoted out of the 320 spot into this spot. Did it for almost 6 years. I can tell you that spot is key to the department. And they also provide all the training like we're doing today. So they train our new and seasoned people on all of their specifics and how the job goes, or what the standards should be, and ensuring the quality and effectiveness. So my role as district was, I would usually show up on scene and assume command. Kind of what that would look like, because I have a full accompaniment of radio channels. So we typically work off of what we call the working channel. In most cases for a structured fire, that would be echo. And it's just Alpha, Bravo, Delta, so on and so forth. But typically we'll be working off of the working channel. And then we have what we call talk around. Talk around is a sub channel that basically is a backup or a redundant channel that if they, for some reason, there's too much chatter on the working channel, I can't get my message across. The roof's about to collapse. What they can do is they can go to talk around and they'll switch over to talk around and I can hear either of them at the same time, be able to respond to crews pretty much no matter what would be. Have a marine channel, and then we have our repeater systems. So for the larger things like a Morton Plant Hospital, so on and so forth, the radio signals aren't all that great. So we use a repeater system, much like a cell tower essentially, but built into our own system. And then what we do is we would actually track units. So this is our command board, and it's set up so we can use a variety of systems. But for instance, we have these identifiers like you see T45, that would be truck 45. And you'll see 2 truck 45s. You see this one with an X. And as I was saying, we have a 4-man truck company. Well, we typically split them 2 in, 2 out. right? So we'll go ahead and have truck 45 and what we call truck 45 X-ray. A lot of times, for instance, what we'll do as command is we'll go ahead and, as you can see, establish command, work our way through our different checklists and priorities, make sure that things are staying in line, make sure everything is succinct, make sure everything is accurate, make sure we're doing everything. But we'll often, for instance, draw a little box. And this little box is that structure fire that represents that house to us. So as we look at it, and again, we'll say, well, this is Alpha, right? And as we said, Bravo, Charlie, Delta. So if my engine officer arrives on scene and pulls a line through the Alpha side, I can designate and show they pulled a line. Where'd they pull a line to? Well, they're working in the Bravo, Charlie corner of the structure. So if something went down, and for instance, that's engine 45, so I would show that engine 45 is working that hose line into that structure. I know where they're at. If something happened, I could tell the RIT team, engine 45 has a down firefighter, say for instance in the Bravo Charlie structure. They know where to go. They immediately know where to go to save a life. That truck 45 X-ray crew, again, your truck is probably interior with your engine, right? Working in that area, doing, as we said, search, rescue, fire attack, so on and so forth. Your X-ray crew, along with, say, for instance, the RIT crew, say I have the squad, is RIT. They might find that the best way into that structure is a back door, not necessarily the front door, because we paid attention to where those crew members are. That's vitally important because, again, our primary job is life safety. Our primary job is the citizens' life safety. But once all the citizens are out, the only life safety aspect is us. So we have to take care of ourselves too, make sure that we're okay. And if necessary, we'd send that RIT crew in and they would pull those people out. And again, they would have the ability to attach them to an air bottle and that type of thing. So we track our crews. If it gets into where they would go to a rehab or so on and so forth, or if it were a 2-story, we would designate all those things. And we use this board to be able to kind of keep track of everything. And again, kind of ensure that we keep things in line. We keep things, all the check boxes are checked. We're not missing something. Oh, we got all these hose lines in there. We forgot to get a water supply, right? So we make sure that all those things are happening, okay? And ideally, it goes well. We put the first hose line in, we spray the water, the wet stuff on the red stuff, it goes out, we save a victim, we're done. Nobody gets hurt, and that, you know, but sometimes it's more challenging than that. So I could show you over here as well, our RIT. So our RIT is located on several different vehicles. As you see, it's marked here for my car. So the crews can come up if they're designated as RIT, and they can come and grab the RIT bag. And that RIT bag has an additional mask. So if they ran into a wall and they cracked their mask in half or something like that, there's an initial regulator in there as well in case they had a regulator failure, things like that, right? So we have all that available that we could go and put a new mask on them, keep them breathing, get them out of the structure. And then inside here, again, as well, is a reduced size air bottle, which will give us some extra working time to be able to get them out of the structure safely. So that's there. We have a tag line, a safety line. So if it's a larger structure, we can tie it off to outside and use that as we go in as a RIT team to kind of help us to find our way out, essentially, right? And if we need to send extra crews in to come help us, all they have to do is follow the line to where we are. So that's our search line or tag line. We have additional rope bags in there. So if we had to lower someone out of a window, for instance, from a 2nd or 3rd story, because that was the only means of egress, we have means to be able to do that. That's in there. And of course, we have our new ballistic vests and helmet, which is a whole different spin on things. As Chief Graham mentioned to you, the difference between fire and police. We used to joke and we used to say that, when we got hired, they gave us a blanket and a pillow and they gave the cops a badge and a gun. Well, now when we get hired, we get a blanket and a pillow and a bulletproof vest. So the lines are quite blurred between what we do and what they do. Any incident scene where there's something like that going on, a shooting, something or other, we're throwing on the bulletproof vest and we're pretty much in there with PD doing different jobs, but in the same scene. So that's a whole nother spin for those that's been around a little bit that we didn't used to have to do that with the bulletproof vest. And now we do, which is a good thing. It's good that we have it. We might hate to have to use it, but we unfortunately do frequently in the city have to use it. So I'll bring you back here to our screen. And this is what we call the MDT, mobile data terminal. And right now it's set up on the calls screen. So these are all the calls happening in the county at this time. And that's obviously going to change throughout the day. When we're on a specific incident, so if this were a real structure fire, for instance, we'd be on the call screen, and that data specific to this event would be on that screen. Give us information such as the address, any call notes from 911, caller states there's multiple victims inside, or the fires through the roof, or whatever it is that they might tell us. And then a mapping feature as well, so we can look at the map. Another thing that we would have, it won't pull up right now because we're not actually on the call, but it has an attachment feature. And what that attachment feature is, and again, this goes back to Nick, the gentleman you met earlier in the planning division. They give us, we work together to build these things, but what we call pre-plans. And those pre-plans tell us in certain structures where all the things are. The stairwells, the elevators, the Knox keys, the fire panel, the access is best here, and so on and so forth. Certain handicapped citizens may live on apartment 303, and we need to make sure that they're taken care of because they won't be able to get out themselves, and all that's in the attachments. So as command, we're not only looking at the scene, we're on the scene, we're on the board, we're looking through the attachments, we're going through all this, and I can also track what units are coming. So if I called that working file or that second alarm, third alarm, so on and so forth, I also have to track those 15, 20 extra units, who's coming, who's on scene, who's not on scene, what players do I have to throw in the game, who's here yet. So for me, it means that doing that is we use these PAR tags is what we call them, or accountability tags, okay? And basically I'll use them whether they're en route, they're staged at a location off site, or they're sitting up close on deck. So I'll manipulate the board as to if we had all these units coming and they're en route, and then all of a sudden the medic unit arrives and they're staged, but then I call them in to be on deck. Well, now I've put them in the game, took them off the bench, now you're working in there, right? So it's a transitional means of tracking where that person is. So say that medic unit started running low on air. They say, hey, chief, we got to come out, we're running low on air, we got to go to rehab. No problem. I take them out, now put them into a rehab, okay? Same thing, engine says, hey, I got to come out, we're going to rehab. I would put them over here, and I would write rehab right here. I'll designate all the units that are there. That's where typically, say, our LR or lieutenant rescue comes into play, similar to the 320 as I described. 320 is the safety officer, the training officer, they're the fire guy. The LR is the medical supervisor, the medical guy. So they handle, assuming what we call in the command structure, medical as their designation, and or rehab. And sometimes it's both, depending on the number of people that we have on scene. So that LR would arrive on scene as another supervisor to set up a rehab area, get other people set up, have the accountability of those units that are now assigned to him or her in that area, track those units, do the vital signs and all those kind of things. So the way the command structure works is you have the first in district chief, that second in district chief, which we met earlier, Chief Dare, right? He would arrive on scene, for instance, and be what we call my command post aide. So he would help me through the incident. Okay, chief, I need you to work the board. I'm going to work the strategy, God forbid we had a mayday. Okay, I'm going to work the mayday. You keep working the fire. And we split that incident up. That command structure then goes further down into, again, that 320, that safety officer. He's that eyes on the prize, that guy out there showing us, that forward set. And the LR, again, another supervisor who would handle medical, rehab, that type of thing. In the absence of 320, our LR will actually typically be designated as the safety officer. So they're able to fill that role. The unfortunate thing is we're robbing Peter to pay Paul at that point, right? So now we have to designate someone else as medical or whatever. So there's continuing to do additional training. I'm still just listening to the traffic. This acquired structure has been given to us graciously by a citizen who's allowed us to go in there, so we're making the best use of it we can. We're running multiple scenarios through to kind of give guys additional training and whatnot. So that additional training helps tremendously. It's a real structure. It's not a Connex box or a building we've been in 1,000 times. We're unfamiliar with it, and that's perfect because we want that. We need to be tested, right? We need to be honed, and that's the best way to do it is real structures that are in our area. Because this structure is going to be just like this structure. So we may have trained in that house, but your neighbor's house catches on fire. We know what your house looks like on the inside, structurally, right? And it helps out quite a bit. Our medic units also pay attention quite a bit going on the medical calls. Hey, in this area, these houses have a single garage. They have the kitchen over to the left. They have a back bedroom. They get a good idea of what the neighborhood looks like, and they know. And again, you had asked about how do we make our way through these structures. One of the things is area familiarization. So we know by running calls, doing training, and observing our area, driving around, looking at houses. But also when we look at those houses, understanding that building construction. So there's a whole different skill set there of understanding building construction. So for instance, when we look at this house, I can tell you, well, with that big, if we look at this one here, there's a big picture window up front. What's that likely going to be? That's going to be a living room, right? If we look over here to the left, we might say, well, that's a different type of window with a different type of blinds. It's probably a different room. That's probably a bedroom, right? So now we say, okay, the garage is here, the living room's here, there's a bedroom here. Where's the kitchen going to be? Well, it's probably in the center over that way, right? So we kind of get used to that. As we walk around the structure, we can say, what's this small little window that's frosted? It's a bathroom, right? So we look at those things. When we arrive on scene as the first officers on scene, we do what we call a 360, a lap around the structure to look at not only the conditions, but the type of construction that we're dealing with. So we can say, yep, this is a single family. This is XYZ type of construction, whether it be conventional, old school construction or modern lightweight, which makes a huge difference in how long can we stay in that structure. Because a lightweight burns much faster. What's the layout? Is it a bathroom over here? Or we have a bedroom, frosted window bedroom? Well, very likely could be a Jack and Jill type setup. So we know there's a pass through. So if we're in the structure and we know, oh, I found the bathroom on the Bravo side, it gives us a mental picture of when I looked, I knew that was in the middle of these two bedrooms. Things like that. We actually look at the stovepipes and the discharges out of the roof. And we can tell you, well, there's an electrical drop right there. There's a stovepipe coming out right there. There's another stovepipe coming out right there. Well, that's probably the kitchen. That's probably the bathroom because you have to have that sewer vent. So we pay attention to all of those things and say, what does this structure look like? When I go in completely blindfolded, I know because I got a mental picture from the outside, what does this look like? It takes time. It takes training, right? But we have to know. We don't have the luxury of not knowing. Again, your conventional construction we talked about this morning with all the new construction that's going on. The lightweight wood that's glued together, well, glue is fuel, right? So I'm a third generation. So my father was a firefighter, my grandfather was a firefighter. And, back in their day, they used to say, well, fire's hot, kid. So that's cool. Your fires were burning at about 300 to 500 degrees. Your fires now are burning from 800 to 1200 degrees. That's right where our gear fails. It happens to be. So if that's the case, also where steel starts to stretch and bend and fall and fail. So we're setting ourselves up. Maybe things not so good. So we have to prevent that. We have to mitigate that. We have to get in the way of that and say, okay, how do we prevent this from happening? We got to train. We got to know our buildings. People need to know our buildings. They have to understand fire behavior. They have to understand fire chemistry. They have to understand building construction. They have to understand all these things. If I roll up and I see this house that looks perfectly fine, I might go in there. If I roll up and I see this house that looks completely out of control, it's obvious. We're not going in there. It's too far gone. There's nothing savable. That the roof's collapsing, it's falling apart. There's no point in us going in there. But it's the middle. It's the in-between. Those are the ones that get moved. It's kind of there. It's kind of not. What do I do? How do I judge it? Can I get in there? How far can I go? And that's where it really becomes skill, technique, and training. So that's why we do these things. Even with fake fire, get those reps. Because that most basic skill of pulling a hose line in the front door is great. But if you don't know whether or not you should even be going in the front door, we have a problem. So we train on that too. We go over reading smoke and tactics and fire behavior and all those kind of different things. Building construction. So gives you a good glimpse, hopefully, on some good things.
Indeed.